The Galactic Confederation had ruled the stars for 10,000 cycles, and in all that time, one truth remained constant above all others. Whoever controlled the Hydra weapons controlled everything that mattered in the universe. And every species from the core worlds to the outer rim understood this simple fact with absolute certainty. The substance known as HO was death itself in liquid form. A compound so terrifying that even speaking its name in formal settings was considered poor taste among the civilized races. And those who had witnessed its effects firsthand rarely spoke of it at all, preferring to let such horrors fade into the darkness of memory. Ambassador Kethferos of the Vectari Dominion had served in the diplomatic corps for nearly 200 cycles, and he believed he had seen everything the galaxy could offer in terms of strange and dangerous things. But nothing in his long career had prepared him for the report he now held in his trembling claws. He stood before the great assembly of the Confederation, his chitinous body clicking with nervous energy as thousands of representatives from hundreds of worlds watched him with their various forms of eyes. And he knew that what he was about to tell them would change everything they thought they knew about the universe. Distinguished members of the assembly, he began, his translator device converting his clicking speech into the universal tongue. Our long-range exploration vessels have discovered a new world in the outer spiral arm, a planet that defies everything we understand about the conditions necessary for life to exist. The holographic display behind him flickered to life, showing a blue and green sphere spinning slowly in the darkness of space. And already he could hear the murmurs of confusion spreading through the massive chamber as the assembled diplomats tried to understand what they were seeing. Initial scans revealed something that our science teams believed must be an error in our instruments. Kethferos continued, his voice growing quieter as the weight of his words pressed down upon him. But after 17 separate verification attempts, we can confirm that this planet's surface is covered in liquid HO. The murmurs became gasps, and several delegates rose from their seats in alarm, their bodies displaying the universal signs of fear and disbelief that transcended all species boundaries. How much of the surface? Demanded High Arbiter Morvine, the ancient leader of the Morvathi people. Her silver scales rippling with barely contained horror. Keth paused, knowing that his next words would send shockwaves through the entire Confederation, and he steadied himself before speaking again. Approximately 70% of the planetary surface is covered in liquid hydro, with additional quantities frozen at the polar regions and suspended in the atmospheric layer as vapor. The chamber erupted into chaos, with delegates shouting and gesturing wildly, some calling for immediate quarantine measures, while others demanded to know how such a world could possibly exist without destroying itself through constant chemical reactions. Silence, roared High Arbiter Morvine, her commanding voice cutting through the noise like a blade. And the chamber slowly returned to an uneasy quiet as all eyes turned back to the Vectari ambassador. No sentient life could possibly survive on such a world, the High Arbiter declared with absolute certainty, her silver eyes fixed on the spinning image of the deadly planet. The Hydra would dissolve any organic matter within moments of contact. So this world is nothing more than a curiosity, a dead rock covered in poison. Kethferos wished with all his hearts that she was right, but he knew the truth was far more terrifying than anyone in this chamber could imagine. And he activated the next sequence of images with a heavy sense of dread. That is what we believed as well, High Arbiter, until our observation drones captured these images. The holographic display changed, and suddenly the chamber was filled with footage of impossible creatures, walking freely along the edges of massive hydro deposits, their soft pink and brown bodies completely unprotected from the deadly liquid that surrounded them on all sides. By the ancient stars, whispered a delegate from the Thyron Collective, his multiple eyes blinking in rapid succession as he tried to process what he was seeing. The footage continued, showing these strange bipedal beings engaging in behaviors that made absolutely no sense to any rational mind. Behaviors that seemed designed specifically to maximize their contact with the lethal substance that should have killed them. Instantly, a group of small creatures, apparently the young of the species, were shown running directly into a body of hydro, splashing the liquid onto each other with apparent joy. Their mouths open in what could only be interpreted as expressions of happiness and delight. "They are playing in it," Ketferus said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sounds of distress coming from the assembled delegates. They submerged themselves entirely, sometimes for extended periods, and emerged completely unharmed. The next image showed adult members of the species sitting beside a flowing river of hydro, using small containers to scoop up the deadly liquid and pour it directly into their open mouths, swallowing it without any sign of pain or damage. "They consume it willingly," the ambassador continued. "Our analysis suggests they require regular intake of HO to survive, that their biology is somehow dependent on the very substance that would kill any other known species in the galaxy." High Arbiter Morvine had risen from her seat, her ancient body trembling in a way that Ketferus had never witnessed in all his years of service. And when she spoke, her voice carried a fear that seemed to age her by centuries. "What are these creatures called?" "They call themselves humans, High Arbiter, and they call their world Earth." The name hung in the air like a death sentence, and every being in that chamber understood that the galaxy had just become a far more dangerous place than any of them had ever imagined. For 10,000 cycles, the Confederation had maintained peace through the threat of hydro weapons, through the certain knowledge that any species that stepped out of line could be destroyed by the most terrible substance in existence. But now that threat meant nothing. Somewhere in the outer spiral, on a world covered in liquid death, there existed a species that had no fear of hydro, a species that drank it for pleasure and bathed in it for comfort, a species that had built their entire civilization around the very thing that the rest of the galaxy feared above all else. The Confederation had found the humans. And as Ketferus looked out at the terrified faces of 1,000 species, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The age of hydro supremacy was coming to an end. And what would replace it was something that no one in that chamber could possibly predict or prepare for. Something that would reshape the balance of power across the entire galaxy and somewhere on that distant blue world. Completely unaware of the panic they had caused, the humans continued to drink their water and swim in their oceans and play in their rain, never knowing that they had just become the most terrifying species the galaxy had ever encountered. The diplomatic vessel Whisper of Caution held its position at a distance of 3 light minutes from the blue planet called Earth, its crew watching the surface through long-range sensors with a mixture of scientific curiosity and absolute terror that made their work almost impossible to perform. Captain Urelix of the Morvathi people had commanded starships for over 60 cycles, and she had seen things that would break the minds of lesser beings, including the aftermath of hydro attacks that had left entire cities as nothing more than pools of dissolved organic matter. But nothing in her long career had prepared her for the casual horror she was witnessing on this impossible world. Captain, the beings on the surface appeared to be engaging in some form of recreational activity near the large hydro deposit on the western continent, reported her science officer, a young Vectari named Kethril, whose mandibles clicked. Nervously, with every word he spoke, Urelix turned her silver eyes to the display screen and felt her twin hearts skip several beats as she watched thousands of humans gathering along the edge of what they apparently called an ocean, a body of hydro so vast that it could supply weapons for 1,000,000 wars. "They are walking directly into it," she whispered, her scales rippling with disbelief. as she watched the humans wade into the deadly liquid as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. Some of them appear to be lying on flat objects and allowing the hydro waves to carry them toward the shore, Kethril added, his voice trembling. And the smaller ones are building structures out of the sand at the water's edge, apparently unconcerned that the hydro keeps washing over their creations. The captain shook her head slowly, trying to process what she was seeing, and she wondered if perhaps her ship had somehow crossed into a different dimension where the laws of chemistry no longer applied. Have we confirmed that this is indeed HO, and not some similar but harmless compound? She asked, grasping at any explanation that might make sense of this madness. Confirmed 17 times. Captain, using every scanning method available to us. And the results are always the same. Pure dihydrogen monoxide, the deadliest substance known to galactic science. And these beings are swimming in it like it means nothing at all. Before Eurylix could respond, her communications officer let out a sharp cry of alarm and spun to face her with wide, frightened eyes. Captain, we have been detected, and the humans are attempting to establish contact with us through a primitive radio signal. The bridge fell silent as every crew member turned to look at their captain, waiting to see how she would handle this unprecedented situation. And Eurylix felt the weight of history pressing down upon her shoulders. She knew that refusing to respond would be considered an act of hostility by Confederation law. But the thought of actually communicating with these hydro-immune creatures filled her with a dread she had never experienced before. Open the channel, she commanded, her voice steady despite the fear that coursed through her veins. And activate all translation protocols. The main screen flickered, and suddenly Eurylix found herself looking at a human face for the first time. A female with dark hair and warm brown eyes who smiled at them with an expression that seemed genuinely friendly and welcoming. Greetings from the people of Earth, the human said, her voice carrying through the universal translator with surprising clarity. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and on behalf of our entire planet, I want to say how excited we are to make contact with intelligent life from beyond our world. Eurylix stared at the creature on her screen, noting the soft skin that should dissolve on contact with hydro, the eyes that glistened with moisture that was itself a form of the deadly substance. And she struggled to find words that would not reveal the depth of her terror. I am Captain Eurylix of the Confederation. Vessel whisper of caution, she managed to say. And we come in peace to learn about your species and your world. The human named Elena smiled even wider, and Eurylix noticed with horror that the creature's mouth was wet with what could only be saliva, another hydro-based substance that would be lethal to any normal being. We would love to meet with you in person, Elena said eagerly. Perhaps we could send a delegation to your ship, or you could send representatives down to our surface. Every crew member on the bridge reacted with visible alarm at the suggestion of visiting a planet covered in liquid death. And Eurylix quickly formulated an alternative plan. We would be honored to receive a delegation aboard our vessel, she said. Though we must first ensure that proper decontamination protocols are in place for the safety of all parties involved. Several hours later, after the whisper of caution had tripled its hydro-containment measures and sealed off an entire section of the ship with emergency barriers, two humans materialized in the designated meeting chamber. Dr. Elena Vasquez was accompanied by a tall male human called Commander James Okonkwo, and both of them looked around the stark metal room with expressions of polite curiosity while the alien crew watched from behind reinforced transparent walls. Welcome aboard, Eurylix said through the intercom system, not daring to be in the same room as these impossible beings. Please remain still while we conduct standard biological scans. The humans complied without complaint, standing patiently while scanning beams swept over their bodies. And when the results appeared on the science station, Every crew member who could read them made sounds of pure horror. "Captain," Catherall said, in a voice that was barely a whisper, "their bodies are approximately 60% HO by mass, and their blood contains hydro as its primary component. And even their brain tissue is saturated with the substance." Rilix felt her legs grow weak beneath her, and she had to grip the edge of her command console to keep from collapsing. "They are not merely immune to hydro," she said slowly, the terrible truth becoming clear in her mind. "They are made of it. They are living weapons of mass destruction, walking around in biological form." Through the barrier, Elena noticed the alien's distress and tilted her head with concern. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice carrying genuine worry. "You all seem very upset about something, and we want to make sure we have not caused any offense." Rilix gathered her courage and spoke the question that burned in her mind. "You carry hydro inside yourselves, within your very cells and organs, so how is it possible that you are still alive?" James and Elena exchanged confused glances, and then Elena laughed softly, a sound that somehow made her seem less frightening despite everything. "You mean water?" she asked, using the human word for the substance. "We need it to survive, and we actually die without it, because every cell in our body requires water to function properly." The translation matrix processed her words, converting the concept into terms the aliens could understand, and when the meaning became clear, 3 crew members fainted on the spot while 2 others began making sounds of religious prayer to deities they had not worshipped since childhood. The humans stood in their containment area, looking more confused than ever, completely unaware that they had just shattered every assumption the galaxy held about the nature of life, death, and the most terrifying weapon ever known. News of the Hydra species spread across the Confederation faster than any message had ever traveled before, racing from world to world through communication relays and whispered conversations and terrified reports that grew more alarming with each retelling within days. Every inhabited planet in the galaxy knew about the humans. These impossible creatures from the outer spiral who drank the deadliest substance in existence, like it was nothing more than a refreshing beverage. And the reactions to this news varied wildly depending on who was hearing it on the crystal spires of Thyrum Prime. The elders of the collective gathered in their ancient meditation chambers and debated the meaning of this discovery for 7 days without rest, eventually concluding that the humans must be ancient weapons created by the mysterious precursor civilization that had vanished from the galaxy millions of years ago. They were left behind as guardians, declared Elder McStall, his multiple eyes glowing with religious fervor, sleeping on their watery world until the galaxy needed them again. And now they have awakened to fulfill their purpose on the harsh desert world of Vector. The ruling council took a far less mystical approach to the human problem, demanding that the Confederation immediately quarantine the Earth system and prevent any human from ever leaving their home planet. They are too dangerous to be allowed among civilized peoples, argued Councillor Drethka, his mandibles clicking with barely contained fear. What happens when they decide to use their immunity as a weapon against us? What happens when they realize they can destroy any world simply by bringing their water with them? But it was among the Morvathi, the ancient silver-scaled people who had helped found the Confederation itself, that the most heated debates took place, with some calling for immediate extermination of the human species before they could become a threat, while others argued that such an action would be both immoral and likely impossible to achieve. High Arbiter Morvine listened to all sides of the argument, her ancient mind processing the implications of this new reality, and she understood that the galaxy was standing at a crossroads that would determine the fate of all sentient life for cycles to come. Far from these political debates, in the dark spaces between stars where law and order held little meaning, another group was watching the situation with growing alarm and desperate Calculation, the Krethak Syndicate, had operated in the shadows of galactic civilization for thousands of cycles, building their criminal empire on one simple foundation: control of hydro weapons that could threaten any world that refused to pay tribute or follow their commands. For generations, the Syndicate bosses had stockpiled HFY in hidden bases throughout the galaxy, accumulating enough of the deadly substance to wage war against the Confederation itself if they ever chose to do so. And this arsenal had made them untouchable by any law enforcement agency in known space. But now, everything they had built was suddenly worthless. If these humans can truly drink hydro without harm, growled Boss Krethak VII, the current leader of the Syndicate and direct descendant of its founder, then our weapons mean nothing to them. And if our weapons mean nothing to them, then we have no power over them. His advisors shifted nervously in their seats, knowing that their leader's rage was building towards something terrible, and they waited to hear what orders he would give. "We cannot allow this species to survive," the boss declared, his scarred face twisting into an expression of cruel determination. "If word spreads that hydro weapons are useless against some beings, others will begin to question our power, and our entire operation will collapse within a generation." He turned to his chief assassin, a silent creature of unknown species who had never failed in any mission assigned to him. "Take our best team to Earth and eliminate as many humans as possible. Make it look like an accident or an attack by another species, and ensure that no one ever learns the truth about their hydro immunity." The assassin nodded once and disappeared into the shadows, already planning the deaths of billions of innocent beings who had never done anything wrong except exist in a form that threatened the Syndicate's power. Meanwhile, on Earth itself, humanity remained almost entirely unaware of the chaos their discovery had caused throughout the galaxy. Dr. Elena Vasquez had returned from the Whisper of Caution with amazing stories about the aliens she had met, and the whole world was buzzing with excitement about the possibility of joining a vast interstellar community. She gave interviews to news programs and spoke at scientific conferences and tried to explain what she had learned about the Confederation, though she still did not fully understand why the aliens had seemed so frightened of her and Commander Okonkwo. During their meeting, they kept asking about water. She told a packed auditorium at the United Nations. They seemed absolutely terrified of it, which makes no sense to me because water is essential for all life as we know it. The audience laughed at the absurdity of aliens being afraid of something so common and harmless, and Elena smiled along with them, having no idea that their casual attitude toward HO was the very thing making them the most feared species in galactic history. A week after her UN speech, Elena received a request that would change everything. The Confederation wanted her to participate in a live broadcast to all member worlds, demonstrating human biology and explaining how her species had evolved on a water-covered planet. She agreed immediately, excited by the opportunity to build understanding between humans and aliens. And she spent days preparing a presentation that would show the galaxy that humans were friendly and peaceful despite their unusual biology. The broadcast reached 17 billion sentient beings across hundreds of worlds, all of them watching with a mixture of fear and fascination as this strange creature from Earth appeared on their screens. Elena smiled warmly at the camera and began explaining the role of water in human biology, describing how their bodies used it to regulate temperature and transport nutrients and maintain cellular function. And the audience listened in horrified silence. Then, to demonstrate her point, she picked up a glass of clear liquid that sat on the table beside her. "This is just ordinary water," she said cheerfully, "and I drink several glasses of it every day to stay healthy." She raised the glass to her lips and drained it in several long swallows, then set it down with a satisfied sigh. across the galaxy. 32 million beings required immediate medical attention for shock. 2 planetary governments declared states of emergency, and the Tharn Collective began constructing temples dedicated to the water gods of Earth. And in the shadows of a hidden base, Boss Kreth X VII watched the broadcast with cold fury in his eyes, knowing that he had to act quickly before these impossible humans became too famous to destroy without consequences. The attack on Earth was coming, and the humans had no idea what was about to happen. The 3 Syndicate warships dropped out of hyperspace above Earth without any warning, their black holes covered in weapons that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of cycles. And their crews believed they were about to commit the greatest massacre in the history of sentient life. Commander Vex still stood on the bridge of the lead ship, his cold eyes fixed on the blue planet spinning below him, and he felt nothing but contempt for the primitive species that had somehow become the most talked about beings in the Confederation. All ships report weapons charged and ready, announced his tactical officer. Hydro cannons are at full capacity, and we have enough ammunition to flood every major population center on the surface. Vexthel nodded with grim satisfaction, knowing that the humans had no defense systems capable of stopping his attack. No shields that could block the deadly rain he was about to unleash upon their world. Begin the bombardment, he ordered. Target their largest cities first, and make sure to hit the coastal areas where the population is most dense. The first hydro torpedo launched from his ship with a thunderous roar, streaking through space toward the massive body of water the humans called the Pacific Ocean. And Vexthel waited eagerly to see the devastation it would cause. The torpedo struck the ocean surface and disappeared beneath the waves. Nothing happened. No explosions, no screaming victims, no cities dissolving into pools of organic soup. Just a small splash that was immediately swallowed by the endless blue water that already covered so much of the planet. Vexthel stared at his view screen in confusion, wondering if perhaps the torpedo had malfunctioned. And he ordered a second shot aimed at a coastal city where millions of humans lived and worked. Hydroshell struck the beach near a place called Los Angeles, exploding on impact and sending a massive wave of washing over the sand and into the streets. Humans ran in all directions, and for a moment, Vexthel felt a surge of triumph, believing that his weapons were finally working as intended. But then he looked more closely at the view screen and realized that the humans were not running from the water itself. They were simply trying to avoid being knocked down by the force of the explosion. And those who had been soaked by the deadly spray were standing up again, wiping their faces with expressions of annoyance rather than agony. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in his long career of violence and destruction. "Sir, the humans appear to be completely unaffected by the hydro exposure," reported his science officer, her voice filled with the same disbelief that Vexthel was feeling. "Their biological readings show no sign of cellular damage or chemical breakdown." Vexthel slammed his fist against his command console and screamed at his crew to fire everything they had, unleashing the full fury of 3 warships against a planet that should have been defenseless against their arsenal. Thousands of hydroshells rained down across Earth, striking cities and farmlands and forests, creating new lakes in the craters they left behind and swelling rivers until they overflowed their banks in London. People opened umbrellas and hurried to get out of the sudden downpour, grumbling about the weather as if being hit by alien weapons was nothing more than an inconvenient rainstorm in Tokyo. Children stuck out their tongues to catch the falling drops, laughing and playing while their parents called them inside with fond exasperation. In New York City, street vendors started selling waterproof ponchos at inflated prices, and taxi drivers complained about how the flooding was making traffic even worse than usual across the entire planet. Not a single human died from exposure to the deadly substance that should have wiped out their entire species. Within minutes, Commander James Okonkwo had been in a meeting at the United Nations when the attack began, and he quickly took charge of Earth's response, coordinating with military forces around the world while trying to understand exactly what was happening within an hour. His communications team had established contact with the Confederation, and he found himself speaking to a shocked assembly of alien diplomats who were watching the attack unfold with complete disbelief. "You have been afraid of water this whole time?" James asked, his voice carrying a note of amazement as he finally understood why the aliens had always seemed so terrified around humans. "It is the most deadly substance in the known galaxy," High Arbiter Morvine replied, her silver face pale with shock. "Or at least we believed it was until this very moment." James looked out the window at the rain still falling from the Syndicate bombardment, and a slow smile spread across his face as he realized the incredible advantage his species had just discovered. "We swim in water," he said calmly. "We bathe in it every day. And our children play in it for fun during the summer months." He paused, letting his words sink in, watching the alien faces on his screen grow more and more horrified. "And we have oceans of it," he continued. "Oceans that cover most of our planet. Oceans that we can transport wherever we want to go. Do you understand what I am telling you?" The Confederation representatives understood perfectly, and several of them looked like they might faint at any moment above Earth. The Syndicate ships had stopped firing, their commanders finally realizing that their weapons were completely useless against this impossible species. And Commander Vexthal ordered an immediate retreat before the humans could organize a counterattack, but it was already too late. Earth's military forces had been preparing a response since the first torpedo struck, and now they launched their counter-offensive using the most terrifying weapons they could imagine. Water cannons, fire hoses, and thousands of soldiers carrying what amounted to super soakers by alien standards. Assault shovels that boarded the Syndicate vessels carried troops armed with pressurized water sprayers that could shoot streams of HO at high velocity, and the alien crews surrendered within seconds of seeing these horrifying devices pointed in their direction. Commander Vexthal himself was captured when a young human soldier threw a water balloon that struck him in the chest, and the feared Syndicate commander collapsed to the ground in terror, convinced that he was about to dissolve into nothing when the humans realized he was merely wet and not dying. They could not help but laugh at his panic, though they tried to be kind about it once they understood how genuinely frightened he was. The Battle of Earth, as it came to be known, lasted less than 3 hours and resulted in the complete defeat of the Syndicate forces without a single casualty on either side. And, as the captured alien ships were towed into orbit around the moon, the people of Earth finally began to understand their place in the galaxy, not as helpless primitives waiting to be conquered, but as the most terrifying species the universe had ever seen, armed with weapons that flowed from their taps and fell from their skies and filled the very cells of their bodies. The aftermath of the Battle of Earth sent shockwaves through every corner of galactic civilization, toppling power structures that had stood for thousands of cycles and forcing every species to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the nature of strength and weakness. The Krethak Syndicate collapsed within days of their failed attack, as worlds that had lived in terror of their hydro weapons suddenly realized that those weapons were not the ultimate threat they had always believed them to be. Boss Krethak VII was captured by Confederation forces at his hidden base, found cowering in a sealed chamber surrounded by thousands of containers of Ajay. Oh, that he had spent his entire life accumulating as instruments of power and fear. "It is all worthless now," he muttered, as the guards led him away. "Everything I built, Everything my ancestors built, all of it means nothing because of those impossible creatures and their immunity to the only weapon that ever mattered. Across the galaxy, stockpiles of Hydra weapons were suddenly viewed not as valuable assets, but as potential gifts for the humans. And several criminal organizations actually destroyed their own arsenals rather than risk having them fall into the hands of beings who could use them without fear. The Confederation convened an emergency session to discuss the human question, gathering representatives from every member species in the largest assembly hall on the capital world. And the debates that followed would determine the future relationship between Earth and the rest of galactic civilization. Some delegates demanded that humans be permanently banned from space travel, arguing that allowing such dangerous beings to move freely among the stars would create chaos and instability wherever they went. They are walking weapons of mass destruction, declared the Vectari representative, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. Every human carries enough hydro in their body to kill dozens of normal beings, and we cannot allow them to spread this threat throughout our worlds. Others took the opposite view, arguing that humanity's unique biology made them the perfect allies in a galaxy that had been held hostage by Hydra weapons for far too long. For 10,000 cycles, we have lived in fear of this substance, said a delegate from the Morvathi people, her silver scales shimmering under the chamber lights. And now we have found a species that can free us from that fear forever. Why would we reject such a gift? The debates continued for days, with passions running high on both sides, until finally Ambassador Kethvars of the Vectari rose to address the assembly. The same diplomat who had first reported the discovery of Earth to the Confederation. I have spent my entire career studying threats to our civilization, he began, his voice carrying the weight of personal conviction. And when I first learned about the humans, I believed they were the greatest danger we had ever faced. He paused, letting his words sink in, and every eye in the chamber was fixed upon him. But I was wrong, he continued, because I was judging them by the standards of our old way of thinking. A way of thinking based entirely on fear of Hydra weapons and nothing else. He gestured toward the holographic display that showed images of Earth, that impossible blue world covered in the substance that had terrorized the galaxy for so long. My ancestors were slaves, Kethvaros said quietly, conquered by a species that controlled Hydra weapons and used them to keep my people in chains for generations. And I grew up hearing stories of the horrors they inflicted upon us. His mandibles clicked softly as old memories stirred in his mind, and his voice grew stronger as he approached the heart of his argument. But the humans do not want to enslave anyone, he declared. They want to be our friends. They want to join our community. And they want to share everything they have with us, including their knowledge of how to live without fear of the substance we have dreaded for so long. He turned to face the assembled delegates directly, his eyes meeting theirs across the vast chamber. They are not weapons, he said firmly. They are proof that what we feared most was never truly our enemy. And perhaps it is time we stopped being afraid. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly, and High Arbiter Morvine called for a vote on whether to grant humanity full membership in the Galactic Confederation. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been invited to address the assembly before the vote, and she stood before the gathered representatives with a glass of water in her hand. The same simple gesture that had caused such panic during her first broadcast to the galaxy. Where we come from, she said warmly, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. Water is life itself. We use it to grow our food and heal our sick and celebrate our happiest moments. She smiled, remembering the swimming pools of her childhood and the rain that fell on summer afternoons and the ocean waves that had taught her the meaning of freedom. Every human child learns to swim, she continued, and every culture on our world has songs about the rain and stories about the sea. Because water is not something we fear, it is something we love. She raised the glass to her lips and took a long drink. And though a few delegates still flinched at the sight, most watched with growing acceptance of this strange but wonderful species. "We do not want to be your weapons," Elena said as she set the glass down. "We want to be your friends and your partners and your fellow citizens of the stars." She paused, and a hint of steel entered her voice as she added her final words. "But if anyone threatens our world or our new allies, well, we have plenty of water to share." The vote was unanimous. Humanity would be granted full membership in the Galactic Confederation, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed in the cycles that followed. Humans spread across the galaxy with their water bottles and swimming pools and inexplicable water parks, settling on worlds that had never known the touch of and teaching alien children that the substance they had feared was actually the source of all life. The balance of power shifted forever, not through war or conquest, but through the simple truth that fear loses its power when someone refuses to be afraid. In the great archives of the Confederation, historians recorded the lesson that would be taught to students for millions of cycles to come, that the galaxy's most terrifying weapon had become its greatest unifier, carried casually by a species who thought of it as nothing more than a refreshing drink on a warm day. Commander James Okonkwo retired from military service and became an ambassador, spending his remaining years building bridges between Earth and the stars. Dr. Elena Vasquez founded the first interspecies medical school, teaching alien doctors that water was not poison but medicine, and watching with pride as her students learned to save lives using the substance their ancestors had feared above all else. Ambassador Cathfaros returned to his homeworld as a hero, the diplomat who had helped bring humanity into the Confederation, and he spent his final cycles telling children's stories about the water people from the blue planet who had changed everything. And on Earth, life continued much as it always had, with people swimming in their oceans and playing in the rain and drinking their water without ever thinking twice about it, never quite understanding why the rest of the galaxy found them so remarkable. But perhaps that was the greatest gift humanity gave to the stars, not their immunity to hydro weapons, but their simple demonstration that the things we fear most often turn out to be the things we need most desperately in the end. It was not technology or weapons that earned humans their place among the stars. It was something far simpler, something they had taken for granted since the first human cupped their hands in a stream and drank deeply of the cool, clear water. They were made of what the galaxy feared most, and that made all the difference.